I'm delighted here today to have Stuart Watson, who is a former partner of EY. And I've enjoyed watching his journey since he retired. I think I met you, Stuart, properly just maybe a few months after you had retired. And you've been very supportive of a lot of the initiatives we've been involved with. And I'd really like to share what you've got out of the whole retirement process. And again, nobody wants to use that word retirement. You're an unretired and a great example of that. So before you left EY, Stuart, what do you think it was going to look like? What were your plans, and how's that happened since? What's happened since?
So, well, first of all, hello, Victoria.
Hello, Stuart.
The plan for me, so I'd been a partner for many years in EY and extremely busy. And the plan for me was to become, if you would, half busy. And with the sort of week's time, if you will, what I planned to do was spend, give or take, half of the week doing, hopefully interesting paid for work. And I intended to be picky to make sure that the work was interesting. And then the other half, a kind of combination of volunteering and pro bono stuff, and without being too pompous, sort of charity work and things that I thought were going to do some good and again be interesting. And indeed things like playing with my grandson. So there was a sort of mixture of personal stuff and pro bono stuff in the other half of the week. Now, of course, the world doesn't quite work as perfectly as that was, but that was the basic plan as I sort of looked at what am I going to do post the firm. And one of the motives there was almost a feeling of, if I wasn't careful, I'd be sort of institutionalized into the very busy world of being a professional services partner and sort of miss out on what I'm imagining is about 10 or 15 years worth of active life outside the big firm, more fending for myself. So there was a sort of combination of motives in there.
And what's the reality been? How have you found it? What's happened? Has it met your expectations? Been any challenges? What were the surprises?
Well, the surprises. So some of the ways that I thought the world worked isn't how the world works. So, for example, I thought that coming from professional services, having a general understanding of lots and lots of businesses, that would be sort of terribly useful to say to some of the private equity firms. I've spent lots of my career in the mid-market there, before and after IPOs and all that. And on the whole, despite lots of interesting conversations with lots of PE firms, on the whole, I've come to the conclusion that what they really want is a sort of deep dive industry specialist as their non-exec, on the whole, generally in a chairman role for PE, rather than somebody. I think you'd have to describe most of us in advisory as generalists on an industry sense, unless of course they're investing in professional services firms. But on the whole, generalists. So that was a surprise. I think one of the other surprises is possibly that there are an awful lot of high caliber people who would like to do roughly the same things that you would do. So that's a surprise. And then if I go to sort of what I missed from the firm as a surprise, because I didn't realize I was going to miss it, there's it's not quite social as in social life at the pub. There's a social interaction that you have with your colleagues. So if you're a partner in any other professional services firm, you have lots and lots of highly intelligent colleagues and indeed highly intelligent clients who are delivering you issues to grapple with, who are generally delivering you a well-formed set of, lovely, interesting stuff to deal with. Your team present you with answers that they would like you to agree with in order you could sign it off. And you have a social interaction with some highly intelligent people. You are kept young by that interaction. You are kept intellectually stimulated by that interaction. And then flip to life after the firm. That doesn't happen anymore. So let's say your staff leverage in your firm is 1 to 20 or whatever it might be. The 20 people that used to sort of feed you with interesting and exciting things to do aren't there anymore. And that social side of work, I was surprised that I missed it. I didn't sort of anticipate that I would miss that, but I do.
And have you been able to replace it in any way with the things that you're doing?
Well, I think you do. You have to actively, I think, go and find those things. It's partly good old-fashioned networking. If you're not out and about and you're not shaking hands and you're not refreshing and making new contacts, well, then you're not going to find opportunities. So there's partly that. I think also partly, and this is a credit, well, without blowing your trumpet for you, Victoria, there's a credit to you in creating the network you've done around the mentoring. So if you get engaged in that sort of thing, and then start essentially offering your services, well, as you know, during COVID, offering the services to potential new businesses for people who want some mentoring from an experienced hand, and that's partly recreating that business of here's an issue, what the hell are we going to do about it, and having the interesting conversation about it. And then as another surprise, back to your question, what were the surprises? It surprises me both in that mentoring work, and I do a little bit of paid consulting as well. Surprises me what you have, which is not necessarily technical knowledge, but more knowledge gained from managing situations and managing people and just your general interaction in the world of business. There's knowledge which I would have assumed before retirement that pretty much everybody had got. You just might have seen a little bit more of it than other people. And they simply don't. And I suppose you stand back from it. If you're a 30-year-old entrepreneur leading a business for the first time, why would you have come across half the problems that now seem to crop up regularly in mentoring sessions and coaching sessions? And yet somehow or other, I don't know, I guess you've forgotten, if you're 50-something, that when you were 30-something, you didn't know this stuff and you've had to learn it. So there's that.
Yeah, or 20-something for a lot of these,
or 20-something, yeah. And then you go to a surprise around breadth. So again, in professional services life, you are generally the acknowledged expert in some area or another. You know, you're a lawyer who deals with litigation, or you're an accountant who deals with audits, or whatever it is. And therefore, guess what? You are concentrated very hard on that. And if some question comes in that is outside of your remit, you're obliged, because of the way the firms work, you're obliged to go to the high quality answer that some other partner and their team will give on whatever this new topic is. If you are essentially the general advisor in mentoring or non-exec or whatever, your deep dive expertise is highly valuable, but you're also required at least to know what are the good questions, if not what the great answers are, on across a breadth of subjects, from how do we market our new product or service all the way over to I don't know, employing staff and what structure of team should we have, as well as whatever your core expertise is. And well, I find that stimulating and interesting. I suspect that some of my ex-colleagues who were in very deep, very technical areas of the firm would find it worrying, frankly, because they like to be able to refer to deep technical expertise in delivering an answer. So there's probably, depending on your sort of mindset as a professional, whether you're comfortable with this breadth issue is one worth, well, asking yourself the question, I guess.
But I don't know, when I've seen, because we've done a lot of events and I go around the room to see the conversations where we've got experienced people mentoring youngsters. Yep. And I'm always surprised that they're worried how they're going to deal with a lot of the questions, when actually I reckon anybody over 50 actually has got in their toolkit of experience something there to draw out. And a lot of it's about questions, isn't it? And about helping them, or introductions to people who might know better than you. And that's been what I've seen is tremendous. I think you've done it as well. You kind of go so far with somebody, say, look, you need to draw on some expertise on whatever. And I think that's tremendous with what everybody's doing in this mentoring. Right, moving on then. One of the things that I have seen a lot of is people who've had, I'm going to say, falling off a cliff or a car crash when they retire. Yep. And they have had no concept. To be honest, I think it's mostly because they haven't had time to imagine it. If they'd had time to think through what's life going to look like after I retire, whatever that is, they would perhaps have grasped some of this, but they haven't. And it's a shock at the difference in life and what it does to you personally. Did you have any of that experience, Stuart?
Well, a bit, but in praise of my old firm, the sort of watershed moment for me, and I was essentially going on a course where there were a cohort of people of a similar age who, being a couple of years into their 50s, were all essentially assumed to be thinking about when they might consider retiring. And what there was nothing magical particularly about the course. I was contemplating of the various things that one could do after retiring and all that sort of stuff. But what it essentially did was to legitimize a conversation, partly with yourself, and then partly with this cohort of people of a similar age. Because to try and put myself back into the mindset I was in then, you had spent, well, the early part of your career essentially trying to become a partner, and then as a partner, essentially trying to, become the important partner and the team leader and the blah, blah, blah. So essentially moving upwards and onwards forever and getting busier and busier and busier. And to admit to yourself, never mind to anybody else in the partnership, that you might consider somehow slowing down and somehow or other stepping off to go and do other things. Well, at various stages of the career, I would consider that disloyal in myself, never mind in other people. And yet, so the firm created this cohort of folks, and the course was perfectly sensible. The sort of license then to have quiet little conversations with that same group of folk who you now knew. They didn't have to admit it to anybody else, but between just a few of you, you kind of knew that if you ran into, Fred Blogs, to make up a name rather than embarrass anybody, you ran into Fred, you could have, you finished whatever the important management meeting is you're doing, you could then have a little chat with Fred about how's the plan going, and, you decided which year you're actually going to go on and all that sort of, and those conversations, I think, help you get ready. And there's occasionally a little swapping of ideas about, they've just taken on, well, let's say they discovered your mentoring scheme. So they've just taken on a bit of pro bono mentoring outside the firm just to try and be helpful to an entrepreneur, but also to get themselves into that, it's just me, there's no big firm behind me, what do I do? So I think that eased me into it. And then we've already done a sort of question about surprises. Mostly, I therefore think I was ready for the fact that, I wouldn't be trotting off to the office every day and all that sort of stuff. And the bit, that sort of missing of the larger team, which I then had to strive to replace. But I think that was the only big surprise.
You've mentioned the course, and of course, we are running these programs now, workshops to help partners retiring, accountants, lawyers, and others. And hopefully what we're doing is developing this further so that there's sort of quite a lot of imagination. What's the value to the firm, do you think, by putting, because it's a cost? And I always sort of think that it's been quite hard for us to work out, well, what's the return on investment for a firm? Because somebody's leaving the firm, normally everything you invest in the way of development, training, whatever we call it, is about a return within the firm that you can see it. Is there a value, though, for when people leave? Why would you do it?
Well, let me do that. I think there's a couple. There's a value in having, shall we call them good leavers? So the folk who are looking to spend the next 10 years outside the firm doing other things, if they leave on good terms, if it's well planned, if they're supported to have good and interesting stuff to do afterwards, then they are a good leaver. They think well of the firm. They're probably an ambassador on behalf of the firm. If they end up in interesting places, they will generally speak well of the firm. If they're tackling interesting topics out there, they might well call on their old mates who are experts in various ways for a bit of kind of, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? Which helps them, but it probably also helps their old mates keep up with, so there's an emerging issue in whatever the topic is. So I think that's quite helpful. But then if we go away from the individual partner, if you think of this as a sort of career cycle, so the younger partners, there's a couple of things going on here. One is if the old guys and girls stay around forever, there's a bit of a worry if you're a youngster about, when can I get to be the head of something? And if there's a natural progression where somewhere in the mid-50s, these folk tend to hand over to the next generation, that seems to me to be a good thing. The other part of the career cycle is if it becomes part of the culture that it's sort of acceptable and indeed a good thing if you take all that expertise and then deploy it out there outside the firm. You're not going to be an institutionalized thing at sort of 60 something still doing exactly what you were doing 10 years before, and you're having a more broad life. that creates a sort of virtuous circle in the firm where fresh talent is coming through. You get basically more diverse thinking at the top of the firm rather than just the same thing year after year. And so you've got a way of refreshing the partnership in a benign way that creates you external networks of alumni who think well of you and encourages the next generation of partners to strive to fill the gaps that are created. So I can only see good in it. The sort of, if you go to the flip side, if people are sort of hanging on by their fingernails, are possibly a little bit past their sell-by, they're either managing the firm in an old-fashioned way if their career's taken them that way, or possibly exhausted. Their client networks may be starting to become a little bit stale if the sort of network of clients that they've built up begin to retire themselves, because lots of this work rests on personal reputation supported by the big brand of whichever firm you're in. So the general refreshing of the upper echelons of the firm, the career aspirations of the youngsters to go through, and indeed then they all know, you know, if you've got 100 under 40 partners in your 300 partner firm, they know that 100 know that not all of them are going to be the single managing partner of the UK or whatever your structure is. And they need to know there's all sorts of interesting things to do. This is a bit, Victoria, like the sell that you make to the youngster coming into, well, certainly accountancy firms, probably all the other firms as well, for all I know. And that you say, you're going to get an interesting training here. You will do all sorts of interesting work. And guess what? In 5 years' time, you'll be bigger, better, and stronger. And if the firm's an attractive place for you to pursue your career, there's lots you can do. And if it's not, there's lots you can do in the outside world. Well, it's sort of the same pitch, but taken into the mid-50s as opposed to, you know, the youngsters just starting out.
I like that. The final bit that I wanted to talk about, Stuart, a lot of this is resonating. We're looking at our mentoring site and what people are getting out of it. We've had some wonderful stories back from the mentees, and one of your mentees was full of praise for what you have done and the support that she's got just by being able to talk things through and being challenged. But a few people are suggesting this is almost a training ground for people who are leaving corporate firms, professional firms, that before you get yourself into some kind of rhythm or the roles, which can take quite a long time, and I think you've sort of confirmed that, it is quite a good, and I'm going to use the word training ground that you just used in a different context, that this can be quite a good training ground in terms of thinking differently, giving you contacts, networks, and experience. I mean, going back to that, the bit you talked about earlier about the private equity firms, I'm almost wondering, you know, if you had worked with some companies, you know, entrepreneurs who then were going to raise PE, if you'd stayed with them for a while, that might have perhaps, who knows, have given you the experience to get the roles that you were looking for then. What are your thoughts about that as a training ground, or what you get out of it as an individual?
Well, I certainly think both parties get lots out of it. So I think I've said already, but if I haven't, I'll repeat myself. There's a whole bunch of experience and knowledge that you've built up that you sort of don't know that people don't know. You kind of assume they know it. And so through the mentoring, understanding that you have an ability to ask, and it's generally asking intelligent questions and then being that sort of constructive questioner of whatever the answer is. Because you built up an ability to do that over the years, but sort of don't quite realize how much you've accumulated, you begin to understand what you've got that's valuable as far as that mentee is concerned. So I think that's extremely useful. The other thing I think that one comes to realize dealing with the young entrepreneurs is, well, they haven't really got time to have conversations with more than one person. They have got businesses to get up and running and to expand, and they've got very little time. So their time is as precious as you know, partner in professional services firm. So they need to cover lots of ground during a mentoring session. And therefore the breadth that is required of the mentor is enormous. It's absolutely enormous. So whatever so you'll have started from a technical specialism in which you will have been a partner in one of the professional services firm, and you can probably answer any question that comes up there with your eyes shut, which is fine. But you are also required to have intelligent questions and observations to make across the entire range of business topics that you could possibly imagine, from the launch of the new product or service to the structure of a team to when to go out from the UK and go to the second country to start, and so on and so forth. Now, this is not to say that you've suddenly got to become some kind of expert on all this stuff, because you're not going to be, are you? But to ask the intelligent question, and I think back to sort of maintaining your networks and your series of mates inside and outside of your old firm, your ability to call on your own little black book, or indeed to continue developing your own little black book, such that when a question comes up and it's outside of your area of expertise, but you're able to recognize it's an important question, you can help the mentee get to the right people who will help them answer the question, which is not, frankly, that far away from the kind of thing you're doing as a non-exec. You bring your experience and your little black book to the party in order that as issues, opportunities, problems, whatever it is come up, you are, if not the owner of the solution, you have a route map in order to get to whatever the solution is. And I think that skill is one that you sort of need to polish, because in your professional life, such a problem came at you from a client, you would have dealt with whatever your particular expertise was with your team, and you were then called somebody from the dark shadows of the firm who was the expert in the other stuff to do it. And firms would insist that that happen, because that's about quality and about having absolutely the right person answer the question. So what you now need to do is replicate that, but you need to replicate it with your contacts and your understanding of where to go to get a question answered. So I think it's back to your core question: is it a valuable thing to do as the near retiring or just after retiring guy or girl to get yourself into the mindset of the non-exec? And so, well, absolutely it is. Yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant to hear. And actually, you've just highlighted something that I hadn't got my head around, because one of the things that we talk about is the need to build new networks and maintain your networks, and how hard it is once you've left. Because, okay, you do the coffee, you can do a coffee every 3-6 months or so, but you need to be in somebody's mind much more. And this bit about going out and asking for help, not to be annoying and without it being genuine, but actually it's a really good way to stay in touch with different people, to say, could you just give me 5 minutes to help me with a company, with my mentee or whatever, is a really good networking opportunity. I hadn't actually thought about that side of it. That's really helpful there, Stuart. Thank you.
One of the things, Victoria, sorry, just before you, just by way of sort of answering a little bit of that, the LinkedIn profile, and I know you probably know a lot more about LinkedIn than I do, but one of the things that I would strongly advise everybody to do is both to polish their profile and look at it essentially without having to rely on the big brand, albeit people will be very interested that you came from somewhere with a big brand, but that's only part of the question, as opposed to, what else can you do? But there's also the business of having lots of your contacts who may in due course be useful to you, both from within your old firm and your own client base and goodness knows where else, readily accessible through LinkedIn, because they will check, I did it recently. I was approached about a particular non-exec role, and I was conflicted. It was an absolute conflict, quite an interesting role. So there is another ex-partner of EY who wasn't in the next desk or anything, but I dealt with from time to time, who I thought would be absolutely perfect for this. And I'd lost his contact details, but through LinkedIn we hooked up. I don't know but so I'm no longer involved in that. He's presumably on a long list or a short list or something now. And bless his little cotton socks, he then ran into something a bit later, which wasn't for him. And my conversation with an exec search firm this morning was as a direct result of him saying, you should talk to this fellow.
Oh, so what goes around comes around. Brilliant.
Well, it's networking. Yeah. Everybody's trying to be helpful to everybody.
Yeah. The final question, we didn't talk about this, but with hindsight, what one piece of advice would you give to fellow partners as they come up to retirement?
I'd have a clear view as to what you would like to achieve. So some people might want to be as busy again in a different way to where they were in professional life. Others, and I know of at least one example in my, the partners I work closely with, essentially say, I'm kind of done with work. I'd like to, I don't know, play with my back garden or whatever their thing is. So it's having that clarity. But and then I think reassessing from time to time as the reality of how the world actually works mashes up against your plans and aspirations. And indeed, in professional life, you probably had cycles often imposed by the firm, which were about appraisal and about how the year had gone and so forth, which caused that to. So you need a bit of that sort of discipline in the way that you approach life. And then the sort of flexibility to go with the blows. Again, from my point of view, not becoming too institutionalized before I'd sort of run out of energy to do other things was quite a big part of this. So I don't want to sort of reinstitutionalize myself in some other way. There's a sort of flexing it to get involved in and do interesting things, basically.
Stuart, I have loved talking to you and hearing your story. There's some things that are different, but a lot resonates with what other people find. And the fact that you planned ahead, I think, is down to the success that you're seeing now. And I am delighted to have you as part of our team and helping others and mentoring. And I hope we continue working together for many years. Thank you very much indeed, Stuart, and good luck for all that you're doing.
Well, thank you for those kind remarks, Victor. I look forward to working with you over the years as well. So thanks very much.
Mutual admiration. Thank you then, Stuart. Take care.
Bye.